Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to Bucks Latest, presented by Fan Arch. I'm your host, Dean Simon. Please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on those post notifications to stay up to date and in the know with all the latest Milwaukee Bucks updates. All right, so this first one on the docket is a little bit of a heavy hitter, and it's that Gary Payton II of the Golden State Warriors. He's generated a lot of interest from potential contenders in 2025-26 on the free agency market, and he's been an unrestricted free agent for an uncomfortably long period of time if you're a Warriors fan, just knowing what he means to that team and what he's meant to the franchise over the past couple of years. But it seems as though he's weighing his options and he's mulling offers from certain teams and a specific group of potential contenders. And that the Bucks have interest in adding Gary Payton II, along with the Miami Heat, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Phoenix Suns, and a potential return to the Warriors can't be ruled out, according to Forbes' Evan Sidery. So, the stats don't necessarily jump off the page. 6.5 points, 3 rebounds, point 0.8 steals. But as a guy that watches tons of Golden State Warriors basketball, you need to realize how amazing the stuff that GP2 does is on a nightly basis. At 6'2", he acts as the Warriors' center in plenty of instances. He hangs around the dunker spot. He skies for lobs. He's a great offensive rebounder. He acts as the Warriors' center all the time. He shot 57.4% from the field at 6'2". And that's just the offensive side of the ball where he adds a lot of things in terms of his athleticism and what that can bring to a team's offense. But on defense, he put up a 2.0 defensive box plus minus, where a lot of superstars in the league, maybe guys that aren't too privy to defense, they'll have a negative in this rate, maybe a negative 1.1 defensive box plus minus, which isn't super terrible. Peyton has a 2.0 defensive box plus minus. For comparison's sake, Drew Holiday this past year had a 1.0. And I'm not necessarily the biggest advanced stats guy. I can't tell you every metric that goes into this stat, but it's some sort of points added per 100 possessions on defense, things of that nature. But the fact that he's doubling up Drew Holiday, who many consider to be one of the best, perimeter defenders of his generation, it's got to be saying something. Of course, Drew Holiday's getting older, but my point still stands. Anyways, the potential addition of Gary Payton II to the Milwaukee Bucks could really change plenty of things just on the defensive side of the ball. With Giannis, with Miles Turner, uh, Gary Payton II is just a game wrecker. That's his MO. That's what he does on a nightly basis. He comes in, he guards the opposing team's best on-ball scorer, and he is just a pest. He gets stops. He's going for offensive rebounds and defensive rebounds, crashing the glass. He's just everywhere. His relentless grit is what makes him the player that he is, and adding him to a team like the Bucks, alongside Giannis, alongside guys like Miles Turner, these three guys together, and even in the backcourt with a guy like Ryan Rollins in certain packages, these are the types of players that can trigger instant, easy offense in transition, and that's going to be what the Bucks want to do going into next year. Giannis, of course, being or assuming the role of point Giannis in 2025-26. They're going to want to get out on the break a lot, and Gary Payton II makes those game changing, game wrecking, havoc causing plays where he gets a hand in the passing lanes. He just rips the player that he's guarding. And triggers instant offense. And he alongside with Giannis, both as great lob threats. Uh, it's just a perfect plan to put in place for a Bucks defense that's gonna purportedly be taking some massive strides going into next year. So it's it remains up in the air whether Gary Payton II wants to uh, join a different team after he's meant so much to the Warriors over the past couple of years. But what this update is telling me specifically is that John Horst, general manager of the Bucks, he is really sticking by what he said in a recent interview with The Athletic, where he's talking about that the Bucks, despite having all the roster spots filled and maybe it doesn't look as though they'll have the avenues to make new decisions going into the season, this still might not be the final iteration of the Bucks that we see before the 2025-26 season commences. Uh, Waiving a guy like Andre Jackson Jr., whose salary isn't fully guaranteed, and opening up a roster spot, opening up more cap, and bringing in a guy like Gary Payton II is still very much on the board. It's still very much a plausibility. So this could be absolutely massive if the Bucks want to take advantage of an opportunity like this and sign an absolute game wrecker in Gary Payton II. Anyways, moving forward, some more Forbes stuff, this time from Matt Issa. He said that two of excuse me, two of the Milwaukee Bucks' most recent free agency decisions are genius, but I believe that genius is kind of a weird label to put on it because one of these two decisions could be seen as more obvious or more implied from a Bucks perspective that they would have liked to get this thing done. And that first one is in the case of Ryan Rollins, who it didn't look as though maybe the Bucks would bring him back. Maybe they didn't have the cap necessary, or things got in the way of having him return to the Bucks. But after such an impressive 2024-25 season, it it just had to be that he would come back and fill up a major spot in this rotation going into next year. And Issa said himself, it's hard to find complementary players who can be a positive force on both sides of the floor. Rollins has the makings of someone who can fill this void for Milwaukee. That is why his 3 year, $12 million contract is such a valuable deal. Of course, we know of Ryan Rollins' defensive potential, shot over 40% from three this past year in limited chances, limited minutes. But we knew what he could be going into, or we know what he can be going into next year and going into the far future. So I don't think it was such an out of the park reality that the Bucks were able to bring him back. You would think that the Bucks wanted to, that they were more, looking forward to it. But the second decision, I could get with throwing a label of being more smart onto it, and that was the signing of Cole Anthony. And Matisse said, and I quote, let's not forget that just 2 short years ago, Anthony was looking like one of the better sixth men in the association. When his shot is falling, Anthony is a strong pull up shooter, and went on to say that in 2022-23, he shot 49.4% on mid range jumpers, 38% on pull up threes, and just displaying all this great passing stuff. And Cole Anthony, like his addition to the Bucks is definitely more smart and more of a genius play because the Bucks kind of thought outside the box a little bit with regard to Cole Anthony because he hadn't yet become an unrestricted free agent. It was known that after he was dealt from the Magic to the Memphis Grizzlies that he was probably going to come to a contract buyout, but the Bucks were able to get in contact with him, I guess before he even, you know, put pen to paper on that kind of agreement that he would be bought out by the Grizzlies. And then immediately after he was bought out, it was reported that he intended to sign with the Milwaukee Bucks. That was a great play. That was, again, great at thinking outside the box, not necessarily just going by which options were traditionally available on the unrestricted free agency market. They waited a little bit, waited for a guy like Cole Anthony to become available as a buyout candidate, and then they struck. They pounced on that opportunity. So that move I can get more behind as labeling it as closer to being genius. But the Ryan Rollins re-signing, you would think that the Bucks wanted to do that more than not. So moving forward, I have a little idea here. Maybe it'll stir up some controversy. Maybe it'll anger a few folks. But if things aren't looking too hot going into 2025-26, at least at the beginning of the year, maybe the first 2 months of the season, I have a little trade proposal to bring in the Celtics' Anthony Simons, who it's been reported that the Celtics are looking to shop Simons. They might not keep him around after bringing him in within the Drew Holiday deal. They might be looking to just get a few different pieces. So in my view, it might not be the most likely situation, but if the Milwaukee Bucks were aiming to add a guy to the team that can take on a bulk of the the scoring responsibilities himself, a lot of the one-on-one shot creation, Anthony Simons could be the perfect option. And the ways in which this could work in terms of salary and financial figures, it would have to be Kyle Kuzma, maybe a guy like AJ Green, and potential draft capital, whether it's a second round pick or if the Bucks are somehow willing to give up the 2031 first, though you would imagine that that would be the absolute last resort. If they were to do a deal of this nature, they could wait until December 15th or past December 15th for a lot of the guys that they re-signed for their trade restrictions to, be absolved, and they could deal a bunch of different players like Gary Trent Jr. and Torian Prince and all these guys that they brought back. But if they wanted to make a move a little bit earlier, maybe they see that the ship is sinking pretty early on, Kuzma and AJ Green and maybe a first round pick could net Anthony Simons from the Celtics, in my view. And the hypothetical arrival of Anthony Simons on this team to take on the starting point guard or starting two guard responsibilities. Uh, it would mark the Bucks' best one-on-one shot creator since the departure, or at least to support Giannis, since the departure of Chris Middleton last year. And while he's not the most efficient player in the world, from a field goal percentage standpoint, from an all-around scoring standpoint, his ability to knock down threes on such a high volume, he'll shoot 38% on threes on 9 attempts. That's not normal. That's the hallmark of a pretty great volume shooter. And for a Bucks team that could put a little bit more emphasis on 3-point shooting going into next year, uh, or at least one-on-one off the dribble 3-point shooting, maybe after screens and all these different actions, Anthony Simons could really, spark a lot of things for the Bucks offense. And he is not just a three-point shooter at all. He's developed a lot as a playmaker. He's of course got the ball on a string as a ball handler, can get to the rim with ease. He's super athletic. He's probably one of the more underrated athletes in the NBA. And I think that's just because he's developed so much of an on-ball, like, shooting off the dribble game that people forget that he was a dunk contest participant. People forget that he was really up there in the past couple of years. But in my view, Anthony Simons could be a pretty great option for the Bucks if they're looking to bring in somewhat of a Chris Middleton light, someone to take on a brunt of the scoring responsibility going into next year. And finally, if that previously mentioned deal for Anthony Simons doesn't go through, if John Horst completely disagrees with me on that front, that they don't need Anthony Simons, the decision or discussion of who will start at point guard for the Bucks on opening night is a pretty interesting one. And FanSided's Dalton Sell came out with an article basically giving pros and cons for certain guys to start at that point guard spot. And the first guy was Kevin Porter Jr. And Dalton Sell basically said that from an experience standpoint, it seems as though KPJ would take on that role. He's played the most alongside Giannis, at least for that final 30 game stretch of the regular season and into the playoffs that he was a member of the Bucks. He developed good chemistry with Giannis. And he developed a lot in terms of his playmaking. He became a pretty great assist to turnover ratio guy, both towards the close of the regular season and into the playoffs. So that definitely helps his case for assuming a role as a starting point guard for the Bucks. The next guy up was Cole Anthony, who his main argument is just because of the offensive spark, the shot making spark that he could provide for the Bucks. Though KPJ is still a pretty great on ball scorer and on ball jump shooter, or off the dribble jump shooter. I mean, Cole Anthony just does his work in a variety of different ways. He's still very much athletic, can get to the rim with relative ease despite his stature, and that's a guy that you could need in the wake of Damian Lillard's departure, as Dalton Sell also mentioned in his article. And then the final option, which is very intriguing and maybe we could see happening as the regular season goes on, is Ryan Rollins. And Dalton Sell said, and I quote, "On paper, Rollins does everything. He shoots the ball, defends countless positions, can pass the ball, score inside, rebound with tenacity, etc. Who wouldn't want, excuse me, who wouldn't want a player like that in the starting lineup?" Circling back to the guard's fit with Giannis running the offense, Rollins would be seamless as he can play off the ball and still make a tremendous impact. And this last option is one that could become more and more possible as he gets more reps and more of a consistent spot in the Bucks rotation in 2025-26. Uh, we all know of Ryan Rollins' defensive potential and what he showed last year and what he could be moving forward, and that he shot over 40% from three last year, of course, in a smaller sample size and limited time, limited opportunity. But we know what Ryan Rollins can be. We know his two-way potential, and that could eventually lead to him assuming starting point guard responsibilities for the Bucks. It's not outlandish to believe that in just a short, maybe 10 game sample of next season, maybe Ryan Rollins just completely blows Cole Anthony and Kevin Porter Jr. out of the water, either from a defensive standpoint, an efficiency standpoint on the offensive end, whether he can develop more as a pick and roll playmaker with Giannis, with Miles Turner, with Bobby Portis. He'll have his chances to prove to Doc Rivers, a guy that absolutely loves Ryan Rollins. He'll have chances to prove to him that he's ready to assume that responsibility and he's ready to take on more of a playmaking role, more of a on ball defensive role guarding the opposing team's best player at the guard positions. it's very much possible that he could really just jump out and show Doc Rivers that he's ready to become the starting point guard of a competitive Milwaukee Bucks team alongside Giannis, alongside Miles Turner, and who knows, maybe he can really show that he's meant to be sort of one of the captains of this team moving forward, though that's moving pretty far ahead pretty quickly. But anyways, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much for watching another episode of Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. I've been Dean Simon. Make sure again to like, leave a comment down below, subscribe, and turn on those post notifications so you don't miss another video. I'll see you guys in the next one, and go Bucks.